I remember in Prague, for example, when it was cold, you were dancing, and TikTok videos you made outside the Spanish synagogue, and even when you went to Theresienstadt with the colorful scarf to kind of remind people the world is also good. It's terrible, but it's also good. It also has color in it.
Here it is.
Ah, there it is.
My beautiful scarf.
All the colors. And
all the colors of the rainbow.
All the colors of the rainbow. And it's kind of offsets the ugliness of the Nazis, which were black shirts and brown shirts and the yellow star. And in those days, yellow was a kind of color of humiliation. That's why the Nazis chose it. Used it. Did you find the star, by the way?
Oh, yes.
Your mother.
Here it is.
Okay.
This is the original star that my mother had to buy.
Good morning, Gidon. How are you?
Fine. Very good. The weather is pleasant, not too hot. And I'm sitting here conversing with you freely, openly, and truthfully.
Good. So let me just introduce you for anyone who doesn't know. I'm here with my friend Gidon Lev. Gidon just turned 90 last month. Gidon is many things, and he definitely should not be and does not want to be known only as a Holocaust survivor, because Gidon's had a very rich, fulfilling life in more than one profession, and with a big family, many children, 15 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But having said that, Gidon was for 4 years as a child a prisoner in Theresienstadt, which in German is known as Theresienstadt, Nazi concentration camp. And we are a day or two from Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day, and we're a couple of weeks away from the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And there are not many Holocaust survivors left who are so articulate as Gidon. So in recent years, Gidon has taken it upon himself, even though it's obviously very painful to relive it all the time, to talk about his own experiences, not only on behalf of himself, but in a way on behalf of 6 million victims who obviously can't speak. So we will speak a bit about Gidon's general life, but I'm going to mainly concentrate on the Holocaust in this conversation. So Gidon, I don't know where to begin. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your very early childhood and family, even before the war?
Okay, I think that's a good idea. My family lived in Karlsbad, Karlovy Vary, which is in the Sudeten, which was certainly part of Czechoslovakia, and a middle-class, non-observant Jewish family, having a pretty good life. Fact is, I have a couple of pictures that will more than illustrate how they felt in Karlovy Vary, in Karlsbad. Here, for example, I will show you a picture of my family. It's quite interesting. This is my family in 1934. 1934, Hitler was already the Chancellor of Germany.
Right.
But you can see my family doesn't show any sign of fear or hesitation. They look happy. That's my grandmother, great-grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, and my father. And guess what? I'm there too. How? In my mommy's tummy.
She's pregnant.
Because she was already 3 or 4 years or 4 months pregnant. And I was there. But they look happy. They are on the promenade next to the river that runs through Karlovy Vary, the Tepla. And as if they have no worry. They're so foolish. It is so totally unbelievable.
May I just remind people for 1 second that the Karlovy Vary is also known as Karlsbad in German. It's a famous spa town, and it was very close to the German border. So what's particularly, heartening but also fearful, ironic, is that it was only a few kilometers away from Nazi Germany. But the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia as it then was a prosperous country and at peace in 1934.
That's correct. It was foolish thinking. I can't even understand it to this very day, and there's nobody else to talk about with me about it, of course. But the fact is, the picture shows that they were untroubled. I guess their thinking was, well, we're here in the Czech Republic. But, what do we have to? Who cares what's going on in Germany? They didn't realize how horrendous Hitler was and is going to be in the coming years. Here, this is a picture of my other side, actually. Now you can see. Here I am too, but this is my father's family. My grandfather, who's holding me, whom I loved dearly, name was Alfred, and me, I'm 3 years old, my father and my grandmother, Teresa. Teresa is the only one who didn't die at the hand of the Nazis. She died in Prague a few months before they shipped us out to Theresienstadt. But also, celebrating my 3rd birthday. I was cute, wasn't I?
Yes, you still are, Gidon. Gidon, we've met a few times, and I will also add to that. You are cute, as everybody who knows you agrees.
Yeah, well, that's almost in spite of everything.
Yes.
It's almost in spite of everything.
So, Gidon, just moving forward, just a bit briefly, the Nazis came. You were born in 1935. In 1938, there was the famous or infamous Munich Agreement, where Hitler basically marched in
1938.
38, yeah, through Sudetenland, where Karlovy Vary was, and it was obviously dangerous for Jews then, and your family was basically forced out and moved to Prague then, right? When you were 3 in 1939, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
1938, I was 3 years old, and when Chamberlain and the French foreign minister and Mussolini and Hitler met in Munich, they didn't invite a Czech representative. Why? Because Hitler refused to recognize the very existence of Czechoslovakia. But somehow he convinced especially the British, that there won't be a war. You give me this part that belongs to Deutschland, and there won't be a war. Of course, for Chamberlain to agree to that, to believe even slightly, he must have closed his eyes, stuffed his ears, stopped his brain from working, and totally just unbelievable. The fact is, I don't think he was that stupid. I just think he truly believed that Hitler would keep to the agreement, that all he's going to take is that part of Czechoslovakia and the rest can be there. He never said it, and it didn't take place. Because within half an hour of signing the agreement in Munich, he took the German army unopposed. Not a shot was fired, entered Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And once he was in Karlovy Vary, in Karlsbad, to go to Prague, there was a main road. There's nothing that stopped him. And of course, 2 or 3 months later, he sent his army right into Prague and then appeared on Hradčany, the government seat on top of the hill.
The famous castle.
Declared, there is no more Czechoslovakia. That's the protectorate of Bohemia and Morava from now on.
Yeah.
And of course, the anti-Semitism, the hunting of Jews. It was so in Karlovy Vary. That's what my family, 3 months after Hitler took over the Sudetenland, moved to Prague, thinking once again, foolishly, well, okay, here's the Sudetenland, let them have the Sudetenland. We're going to Prague, that's the Czech Republic. And it was all just unbelievable.
And I remember, because you've told me when we've met, but also, by the way, you've written recently a very good memoir with co-written with your partner, your girlfriend, Julie Gray. And it's also in the book, which I recommend, called Let's Make Things Better. I don't want to be over promotional, but I happen to have my...
No, here it is.
There we are. But what I want to say, because you've also told me yourself that, the rules against Jews in Prague, this is before the Holocaust began in earnest. Jews weren't allowed to go out after 8 p.m. They weren't allowed on public transport, apart from very particular trams where they had to sit in special Jew sections on the back.
Right, at the very back.
Right, yes.
A million and one thing.
Yes.
At one point, they stopped Jews from using any public facilities like pools, gyms, parks. I remember, I was only 4 or 5 years old. I remember my grandpa used to take me to a little park right near where we lived. We lived on Italska 7. And
which is anyone who knows Prague, that is just north of the center Václavské náměstí Square in the Vinohrady district. Yes.
Yeah. Just about 200, 300 yards away from Václavské náměstí, the Václav Center. And I remember my grandpa used to take me to the park, and there were swings there and slides, and I was very happy. I would run to one specific swing and climb into it. It was like in the form of a canoe. And if he would push me, and I was in seventh heaven. And then one day we came there, and I ran, and all of a sudden my grandpa ran after me, said, no, Peter, you can't go today. I'm sorry. And I cried, and I was angry. Why? What did I do? What Wasn't I a good boy? Didn't I eat my lunch? I said, no, but it's not that at all. It's because we are Jewish. And then he showed me, you see over there, you see that sign? It says, Juden
Verboten.
verboten. Juden verboten?
Yes, Juden verboten. Jews forbidden.
I knew I was a Jew.
Yes.
I knew I was Jewish. I knew that even though we weren't religious, I was a Jew, what it meant. But I was so upset. And he held me and tried to calm me and explain to me. Of course, there was no logical explanations at all. We were simply not allowed. Even on public benches that were on some of the streets, so people could sit down or rest for a few minutes, Jews were not allowed. And one of the final things before they started sending us off to concentration camps was we had to wear the Star of David. I think I have it up.
What the Nazis did, for people who don't know, is took the Jewish religious symbol, the Star of David, and they turned it into a kind of humiliating yellow to add to the humiliation of Jews and also to identify them. So yes, Gidon, if you have one to show people.
Yes, I have. Julie, could you bring that blue folder for my
we'll show it
at
in
the
a
bottom. At the bottom.
Yeah. So all over.
Show it to you.
Yes.
I have.
Yes.
This Magen David is actually original for my father, for my mother.
Your mother, this yellow star that the Nazis made your mother in Prague wear to identify her as a Jew and kind of humiliate her because it's in yellow. And this is before people were taken to camps. This is in the period where Hitler still could have been stopped by other countries before the invasion of Poland, before World War II had actually started.
I can't find it.
Don't worry, Gidon, don't worry. But the fact you've still got your mother's yellow star is remarkable. In fact, your survival is remarkable because you were one of the first people aged only 6 years old in 1941 in December to be transported to the concentration camp north of Prague, which the Czechs called Theresienstadt, the Germans called Theresienstadt. And you were survived there for 4 years between the age of 6 and 10, one of the only few children to survive for a whole 4 years.
Yeah, well, there's actually an argument going on. How many children survived? But the question always is, in my mind, what was considered children? As far as I know, there were something like 15,000 children and young people up to the age of 16, 17 who either were in Theresienstadt or went through Theresienstadt and were sent to the east. Now, it has to be noted here that people in Theresienstadt did not know that there existed firing squads and gas chambers. Gas chambers. We didn't know. But the fear of being sent to the east was there all the time. The suffering in Theresienstadt was somewhat less than in places like Buchenwald and Dachau and Bergen-Belsen. But the fear of being sent to the east and the fear and the hunger, constant and consistent, night and day, were there all the time.
And of course, thousands of people did die in Theresienstadt, even though it wasn't. Yes, it wasn't.
Yes, you're quite right.
Yeah,
over the 4 years, something like 35,000 people died. They weren't shot, they weren't gassed. They died from hunger, overwork, exhaustion, sickness. And we suffered from lice. They were all the time there, and they spread the sicknesses. And Theresienstadt had these big buildings, 3 stories high, that were built from before World War I even. And in each room, there was anything from 8 to 12, sometimes even 14 people in bunk beds, and their baggage, and the kids. It was horrific. And sometimes I wonder how I managed to survive.
Well, just to put into context, of the 15,000 children, teenagers that were in Theresienstadt at some point in the war, at the end of the war, only 92 children were left alive there, and you are one of these 92.
Interesting, because you say 92. Some people say it was 105 or 103. Well, we will never really know.
Well, it was a very small number. It was a very tiny percentage.
Less than 1%.
Yes.
Less than 1%.
And you'd gone there already in the freezing cold weather in December 1941. I remember you saying you were prisoner 885. So you're one of the earliest prisoners. So it's like a double miracle that you survived, because you also survived a whole 4 years there.
Correct. My daily existence was one of survival. How to survive? How to find somewhere something to do in order to maybe find another little piece of bread, or have an apple, or a partially rotten potato. This was more or less my daily existence, because in the Kaserne, in the barracks that I was in the Dresden barracks. It's still there, and they're beginning to work on it and fix it up and keep it. The children of mothers that went out to work at 6 in the morning and came back at 6 at night or 7 at night. We didn't have organized activities. At least I don't remember them, but maybe there were. All the children lived separate from the parents in the private housing of what used to be the people of the village, because Theresienstadt was simply an ordinary sleepy village.
It was a Czech village taken over by the Nazis to turn into a concentration camp.
Yes, that's what Hitler claimed, that he made a special town for Jews. And at one point, they put on a whole show when the Danish Red Cross came. But this happened already very late, in 1944. By then, I had already been almost 3.5 years in Theresienstadt.
And also, of course, the rest of your family, other than your mother who managed to survive with you, they were transported to the east. And you've told me, and I know from others, that it was even more horrific for old people, such as your grandfather, your dear grandfather Alfred. And indeed, I might just point out my mother's grandparents were also in Theresienstadt before being transported to Treblinka and to die. And you've told me, and it's in your book as well, about how the elder people were given even less food, virtually starved, given rotten food, not given medicine, etc.
Oh, I think that the elderly people had it terrible. They got the least amount of food because they weren't working. They were crowded in one barracks. I think it was the Hamburger barracks, but I'm not sure. You can fact check which one it was. It was one barracks, and people died. They were overcrowded. Here I have a picture of my great-grandmother. The great-grandmother that I showed you before, that was in Theresienstadt in Karlovy Vary walking, that's her. And she spent I think she was in Theresienstadt for 3 months and was suffering terribly.
And she was elderly. She was very old already.
I mean, she was 83 years old.
Yeah.
83 years old. And very fine and used to cleanliness and order. And here this was horrific for her.
And then
I remember, because there are many things as a child I don't remember, but I remember one day she told my mother, "They're sending me to the east." And she was almost relieved. Oh, to get out of this hellhole. But of course, she didn't know that she was being sent to Treblinka. And Treblinka was a death camp. Nobody came out of there alive.
And you also mention, you and Julie mention in your book, and it's obviously in other Holocaust education too, the journey itself was hell. People were crammed into trains without air, without water, without food. Many people already dead by the time they even reached Treblinka. And these were refined, educated, middle-class, law-abiding citizens of Central Europe, who other citizens of Central Europe, the Germans and their Austrians and their collaborators, treated beyond the imagination bad.
Yeah, the whole idea of this camp, it was a transit camp. People came and people came. And the problem was that even all these fine people, musicians, dancers, puppeteers, they may today perform on a very high level, and tomorrow receive notification that they're being sent to the east.
Yeah,
that was another big thing is the whole idea of Arbeit macht frei.
Right.
It's such a cynical and big lie.
Yeah. So in case people know.
Yeah, it was exactly the opposite. Yeah. Arbeit macht frei. Only way it made you free is that you died.
Yeah, so that is German saying work makes you free. That was on the entry to Auschwitz, but it was also on the entry to
Übernichtung durch Arbeit. That was their motto.
Yeah.
Übernichtung durch Arbeit. Sometimes foolishly, because many of these people were working in factories producing things for the war. For example, the Germans were losing the war on the east against the Russians because of the cold, the snow. And these people were working on gloves and shoes and jackets. And yet their German Nazi ideology was so embedded that even though these people were doing things and producing things for the soldiers on the front, they underfed them, mistreated them, and killed them, so that less people were working on these pieces of clothing that could have maybe saved some of the old soldiers in the East. What we call in German, wahnsinnig. Wahnsinnig.
I just want to also add, because the Nazis, just for people who don't know, invited, as you mentioned before, the Red Cross into Theresienstadt at some point for pure propaganda. And they allowed for a short period children to draw pictures, some of which you can see in the Jewish Museum in Prague, some of them also in the museum in Terezin and also in Yad Vashem. And they allowed them some theater and other cultural activities. No one should be under the illusion that the camp was somehow okay or fun and games. This is pure propaganda. And it's very important that people today who see these pictures are not taken in by that, I think.
You are so right. The fact is, everything was built on the big lie. The big lie is we're treating these people properly. There is no such thing as gas. Do you know that more people, Jews and non-Jews, were actually shot than gas? I didn't know it.
Yes, in Ukraine and elsewhere, there were mass pits and killing fields.
Yes, no, Jews are sometimes, in order to save bullets, they would line the people up in such a way that with one bullet, they could kill 5 to 10 people.
Went through several people. Gidon, we may come back and do a second part to this, but we only have, because we said we limited the time, about 4 or 5 minutes now. So for this particular conversation. So I just want to move forward for a second. We've met a few times. You met in Prague. We went to also in the Israel. We went to the Beit Theresienstadt, the museum there, which, by the way, I recommend on the kibbutz there for anyone to visit. It's a very small but meaningful Holocaust museum. Gidon, very many survivors did not speak about their experiences much, or if at all, after the war. Partly because they wanted to get on with their lives, partly because it was too painful, partly because, unfortunately, other people didn't really want to hear about it. And in recent years, there's been much more interest, rightfully so, with the Holocaust. But as the last survivors die out, you have taken it upon yourself and some others, there are very few left, to really educate with first-hand stuff. And I just want to briefly mention to people that this has ended. You've addressed the Czech Parliament, you've been with Julie even to the United Arab Emirates and spoken there. And you even accompanied Elon Musk, who's not your favorite person, to Auschwitz to show him what the Holocaust was after he said something which some people thought was a bit anti-Semitic. So in the last question I have is just to remind people, you cannot imagine how positive and fun Gidon is when you're with him, because he takes the best from life. And he dances. We even danced with my young daughter in Prague for fun, for a TikTok video. But Gidon, what is your message now for people watching for Holocaust memory moving forward?
Okay, first of all, you are quite right. After the war, I was 10 years old. I didn't want to talk about what happened. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have. But I was concentrating on here, now, today, and the future. And that was the way people cope with so much loss and so much pain. Not to talk about it, to consider. I concentrated on my life, going to school, going to a Zionist youth organization, beginning to think about a homeland for the Jewish people, uh, going on hikes, speaking to parents to have their children go to summer camp for this, for my organization. That my concentration was not that I feared, but that my energy is concentrated on now and today. And I became a folk dance teacher, not just a folk dancer, but folk dance teacher, both in Canada and in Israel, actually. I became a farmer. I milked more than 200 cows a day, sometimes twice a day, when I was on Kibbutz Zikim, right near the Gaza border. I was there for 7 years and enjoy life. And I built a family.
A big family.
Yes, actually, I was married twice. The first time, and unsuccessfully, mind you, maybe foolishly. But I have two wonderful children. One lives in Santa Cruz, California. One lives right here on a kibbutz, 20 minutes away from here. And I have another 4 other children for my second wife. And we raised a family of 5, 6 children. So they're all here. I have 16 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. The last one was just born a month ago.
When you're already 90. Amazing.
Yes.
Yes. So, Gidon, of course, you've built an amazing life, but after your beloved wife, Susan, passed away, a few years later, in I think it was 2017, you met Julie, who's now your partner, your girlfriend. And you originally met Julie because she was a writer and an editor, and you had decided by then, already in your 80s, that you wanted to write down about a memoir, basically, and you were looking for someone to help, and you met Julie and she became your partner. But one thing Julie did, or encouraged you to do, is not just to write, but at that time, TikTok was taking off for young people. And unfortunately today, a lot of young people don't have the patience to read books, although they should read books. Please, young people watching, read lots of books. But anyway, TikTok, these short little videos, was a format that could reach millions of people. And I remember, Julie, there were a couple of other Holocaust survivors, Lily Ebert, who's unfortunately passed away, aged 100, an Auschwitz survivor in London. Her great-grandson, Dov Foreman, was helping her do little TikTok videos. And you knew Lily, or you were in touch with her, and they also explained to you and Julie. So your TikTok audience suddenly went literally into millions. It was incredible, really. So tell me about the last 5 or 6 years where you have now dedicated a lot of your time to Holocaust education.
Well, I would say this, that the very act of getting on TikTok and doing, I couldn't have done without Julie.
Sure.
She was the instigator and creator, and it was quite amazing. Almost every day we did a new, yes, and people responded. And I had 500,000 followers. And the fact is that we realized that we want to take part in explaining and telling about the Holocaust, because people forget. Even I forget. And the fact is, we shouldn't forget, because the horrors of the Holocaust are not just against Jews, but the horrors of hate because of who you are, or what color you are, or what religion you are, is terrible.
And also, one of the lessons is how a very civilized society, that will be Germany and Austria, which maybe in the 1920s was the most civilized society in the world, full of, scientists and classical musicians, how supposedly intelligent, educated, civilized people can turn into barbarians. And through propaganda, through so obviously the lessons of the Holocaust are not just to remember and pay tribute to the victims, but to warn how fragile every society can be.
Exactly. We became and we are fighting hate, violence, not only against Jews, but against Muslims, against people of color or another religion, or a certain belief in their sexuality. The fact is, we need to learn to accept each other for who we are and make the most of that. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's today what we're doing.
You are. And I want to just finish off on a slightly more positive, upbeat note, because it's slightly my fault that I've asked Gidon to address the worst period of his life, a very serious life. So anyone watching this will think Gidon is a very serious person, which of course he can be. But one of the ways Gidon has been such an effective communicator to young people is Gidon also has an incredible sense of fun and vibrancy. And sometimes in your TikTok, your very serious message of your TikTok videos, but you have danced, you have worn the beautiful, colorful scarf that Julie made for you. In fact, you have that scarf. It's a beautiful, it's a work of color to introduce in your videos and so on. And I remember in Prague, for example, when it was cold, you were dancing, and TikTok videos you made outside the Spanish synagogue, and even when you went to Theresienstadt with the colorful scarf to kind of remind people the world is also good. It's terrible, but it's also good. It also has color in it.
Here it is.
Ah, there it is.
My beautiful scarf.
All the colors. And
all the colors of the rainbow.
All the colors of the rainbow. And it's kind of offsets the ugliness of the Nazis, which were black shirts and brown shirts and the yellow star. And in those days, yellow was a kind of color of humiliation. That's why the Nazis chose it. Used it. Did you find the star, by the way?
Oh, yes.
Your mother.
Here it is.
Okay.
This is the original star that my mother had to buy, and she did something that the Germans demanded from a certain moment on in the Czech Republic, that every Jew has to wear it on their clothing on the left-hand side whenever he leaves the house. But you don't go in one sweater or shirt every day. So you have to buy 10, 15, 20. They cost 1 krone. They didn't give them away. My mother said, no, I'm not. I'm buying only one. And then she used a pin at the back. This is the original pin. I don't know if you can see.
Yes, I can see.
And simply, whenever she went out in a coat, she pinned it on the coat. She went out in a shirt, she pinned it on the shirt. Of course, there was a little bit of a danger involved here because the Germans could have stopped her and checked, but they couldn't check every person. So, they saw the star on the clothing. They were. But this was the final stage of isolating, humiliating, ostracizing, degrading the Jews from the rest of the population. The next step, Theresienstadt.
Yes.
Next step, creating a place for Jews. They said resettlement, they called it resettlement. But it was not a resettlement. It was taking all the Jews, probably the cream of the Jewish population in Czechoslovakia, and bringing them to Terezin, locking them up and abusing them.
Yes. And today, unfortunately, there is still anti-Semitism. In some respects, it's even growing, which is why it's so important and courageous and wonderful that you are speaking out. Because again, I want to say that, you suffered a lot in your childhood, and it's hard to spend your later years, you're 90 years old now, having to think about this and relive it, but you're doing it for the 26 relatives of yours that were murdered. You're doing it for the millions of others, and you're doing it for a better future, which is why, again, your book, which is a lovely book, really. I enjoyed it a lot. In fact, you're wearing your scarf on the cover here. It's called Let's Make Things Better. So, we have Yom HaShoah tomorrow, and then we have the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Theresienstadt in 2 weeks from now, or maybe even less. It was the last of the camps to be liberated.
Yes, in May.
In May 8th and 9th.
May 1945.
Yeah, and you people can read about this in your book, but your mother survived with you. I just want to, if I may, make one reference to another person I've interviewed in this series who passed away afterwards, who was also in Theresienstadt at the end of the war, my Hungarian friend Biela Dekany, who was in Belsen, and then he was taken to Terezin in April, and he was liberated in May 1945. And his mother, who was also survived, the only one who survived, she died one day after liberation, because even at the end of the war, there were people starving or with disease and so on. So, you are very courageous to have lived such a wonderful life since, with Julie's help and support in recent years, spreading your experiences and, to 120, as the Jewish phrase goes. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, my thought, I wouldn't even say final, is let's try and do things better. Here, there, and everywhere. Because it's possible. There are enough good people around that can make a difference. And each one of us does make a difference. Even I, at the age of 90, am trying to do so.
And succeeding.
Very much for having me.
Yes, you're very welcome, and I wish you a good day and a good period ahead. Gidon Lev, he's wonderful. He is with us. These are two of the greatest Czech-born Jews. Kafka, Lev. Gidon, better
and
than
I,
friends.
a Holocaust survivor, born in Karlovy Vary, lived in Prague for 3 years before the Germans sent me to the concentration camp. And here we are.
Yes, 4 years in Theresienstadt. And here he is, a survivor.
Macarena, bala tu cuerpo alegría Macarena, que tu cuerpo para dar la alegría y cosas buenas. Bala tu cuerpo alegría Macarena.